welcome Sangeet Paul Choudary on stage. Sangeet is the best-selling co-author of Platform Revolution and the author of Platform Scale and the founder of Platformation Labs. His work on platforms has been ranked by Harvard Business Review as one of its top 10 strategy articles ever, alongside the works of Michael Porter, Clay Christensen, and others, and has been featured on several occasions in HBR Top 10 Must Read compilations. He has also served as an entrepreneur in residence at INSEAD Business School and as the co chair of MIT Platform Strategy Summit. He's a frequent keynote speaker at leading global forums, including the G20 Summit, the World 50 Summit, the United Nations, and the World Economic Forum. He has advised the leadership of more than 35 of Fortune 500 firms. Sangeet, thanks for joining us from Singapore. And let me start, this discussion really. We are really, platforms have been around for a while with us,
Right.
and now we are witnessing a very rapid rise of platform economy. What sparked your interest in this field, researching, studying, and writing when they weren't so big? Would you be able to shed some light on your journey?
Yeah, so this goes back around 13 or 14 years back when I first, I was at that point working at Yahoo, and I kind of felt that there was something very fundamental about the internet that Yahoo as a company did not understand. And so initially, I started framing some of my thoughts over there. Uh, Post that, at my next role, I got to interact with a lot of entrepreneurs, VCs, and I repeatedly saw that they saw the world through a narrow lens of what they were building or what their thesis was, but not fundamentally how our business models or the economics of business models completely changing because of the internet. And at that point in time, people had different kinds of frameworks to think about it. Somebody would say it's physical versus digital. Somebody then would say it's software versus data, but none of it was a fundamentally different business model. And so that's what kind of got me interested in kind of figuring out how exactly do you explain the difference between how traditional businesses work and how the internet is fundamentally changing things. And this was 2008, 2009. That's when Facebook went out with Facebook Connect, created it as an identity management system for the whole internet, uh, proliferated its like button across the internet. Uber, Airbnb started coming up. GPS based, location based services because of the smartphone coming in. So a lot of the thesis that I was building kind of started playing out in real time, and so that got me really excited. And so around 2012, I quit, working in industry, spent a year almost researching this. Then, MIT came across my work, joined forces with them, researched there over the last several years. That's where most of my books and research have come out, and eventually, I've kind of looked at fundamentally what excites me is that. When we talk about product management, very often the legacy that we're coming from is a legacy where the product is the end product, where you are building something. And traditional software businesses are about licensing, whether you call it a subscription model or you call it a traditional license model. It's fundamentally about building something and licensing it out. And the only thing that changes from a non-software product to some extent is that A, there is scale because of the computational power of software, and B, there's scale because of the zero cost of replication of software. But that was not sufficient to explain what was happening with Airbnb, Uber, Facebook Connect, and many other things around the late 2000s. And so that's where the idea of platforms really kind of comes in and explains that fundamentally, when you're moving to a world that is going to be increasingly connected, increasingly more data rich, you're going to start seeing business models that benefit from A, harnessing these connections, and B, centralizing that data. And if you think of the three cycles of narrative that happened after that, I was talking about this around 2009. 2011 to 2014 was when we talked about big data and data processing and scale in
Yes.
that. 2014 to 17, we talked about machine learning, deep learning, and getting open sourcing that and commoditizing the algorithm to bring the value in the learning model. And then 2017 onwards, we talked about surveillance capitalism, which has gone to a different level right now. So fundamentally, the business model is different from the traditional software licensing business model. And a platform in itself is not the end product, it is the organizer of the market within which the end product gets created and exchanged, whether it's an application or the taxi ride. that's fundamentally what a platform then is. So that's, kind of the story of what kind of got me interested in this, and it just kind of followed the rise of platforms as well.
Oh no, this is very helpful, Sangeet, to understand your journey because when I talk to tech practitioners, especially, right, and we both cross paths at Yahoo, a lot of classical product management practitioners and tech practitioners consider platforms as you know uh, as a place where you can get core sets of common technology capabilities that serve multiple use cases, right? And since you have very fundamentally thought about definitions of platforms, how do you see this point of view on platforms as a follow-up of what we just now discussed?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because when we when we think about how software has kind of you know uh, pervaded the economy. So there's the cliche of software eating the world, but let me break that down into three parts, right? Because we don't mean anything when we say something like that. Software has kind of pervaded the economy in three different phases. The first phase, I would say, is when software was still a point solution and it was replacing a non-software product. And at that point, a platform would be anything that would allow you to enable repeated creation of software, or repeated innovation by abstracting the basic core components. And that is the legacy thinking of platforms that we have. But if you go beyond that, what has started then happening is that software, from replacing point products or point solutions, then moved between 2010 to 2015 in particular. Not that it didn't happen before that, but in particular during that time, when we started seeing the adoption of cloud at a global scale, it moved towards replacing not just point solutions but infrastructure. It moved towards replacing the infrastructure of a business, and not the IT, but the actual infrastructure on which it would, the business would work. So channels would started getting connected. We started talking about omni-channel, and so all of that happened. So what I'm trying to again say is that when we had this view of software as as point solution, the way we saw a platform with a certain thing. Now the way we saw platforms was a way, a fundamental infrastructure on which economic functions could be rejigged. Say Shopify, you can build entire new companies on top of it. It's no longer just a point solution. And then we've reached a point where, because of the proliferation of API, there's not just companies that are being rethought as software. We are rethinking value chain interactions as software, because every function in a company can be converted into an API. That API can be unbundled from the company. So a bank could release an API, but a fintech could unbundle that API and create a whole business around it and say, I'm just a payments company, or I'm just a lending company. I'm not the whole bank. I don't need to own the balance sheet. And so if you think of it from those terms, because I tend to, even though I have a technology background, I tend to apply the economics lens. Where is the economics changing? Initially, it was just the product economics that was changing. So we would say repeated product creation, that is platform. And so abstracted use cases, platform. Then we started seeing the firm economics changing. And so we started seeing the rise of marketplaces and stuff like that. And now we are seeing entire industry economics changing, because the a particular function can be converted into an API. Stripe can be embedded into any number of different contexts as just one function. And so when that starts happening, how companies' behavior start changing as well. So, really, the way I think about platforms today again has evolved through this time. I would say the first version was, yes, it's about abstracting key layers of functionality so that new innovation can happen on top of it. The second version was about, it's about enabling new markets of interaction, which is where the Uber Airbnb analogy starts coming in. The third iteration, I feel, is really about, it's about creating new standards for how a certain industry works, embedding your functionality into other companies, and through that expanding across the whole industry. And the way you gain scale is, you basically, you create entirely new frameworks within which an industry would now start operating. So I'll just give an example to make that clear. Think of what Google is doing in healthcare right now. Google is moving into literally everybody who is on Google Suite with Google Workplace. Now that Google Suite is HIPAA compliant, they've combined that with DeepMind, and combine that with the data sets that are coming out of the Verily research site that they're funding, to create a new infrastructure for the whole healthcare industry. So to me, that is the next generation of where platform businesses are going. They are now moving to a point where you can rejig the infrastructure for the whole industry.
Fascinating. And I was reading this your latest report, State of Platform Revolution, right?
Yeah.
And consider, very very interesting themes, nine that you talk about. It would be interesting to delve in one or two in the limited time we have, Sangeet. But for the audience who might be unfamiliar, would you kindly just summarize the nine themes so that we could kind of then delve in some of them?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things that are. I'll summarize some of the most important ones. There are a few things that I believe are really important in understanding platforms for this year, and that's what that report talks about. The first thing is that when sudden behavior shifts happen, you start having the opportunity to create entirely new business models around that. And even if the behavior returns, if the business model has created a shift in industry dynamics, the business model will not return to the original. And I'll give two quick examples of that. We've started doing a lot of streaming and doing less of going to movies in theaters. Now, once we get back to normal, we will go to theaters. But what would have happened in between would have been that theaters would have gone out of business, and more importantly, studios and theaters had a relationship where studios would launch in theaters for a certain window and not launch on streaming, and that window would get eroded, and we would streaming companies would in the meantime come up with new ways to monetize for studios. So if that plays out, even if the behavior goes back to moving to theaters, the theater studio relationship would have changed forever. Or if I take another example, think of contactless payments. We've been trying to, NFC has been around forever, but we've not succeeded in getting contactless payments adopted. And what COVID has kind of done is it's solved the chicken and egg problem. Will the merchant adopt it? Will the user adopt it? Well, with COVID, both have adopted it. And so what can now happen is that the payment instrument is unbundled from the card and unbundled from the terminal. So anything could become a payments terminal and anything could become a payments card, which means that in the next phase, we're likely to start seeing more of machine to machine payments happening because the payments instrument can now be embedded into any of these functionalities. So that's one, big theme that I believe entirely new business models are going to come out because of a shift in behavior that has happened. The second big theme is around China and the way it's playing in the platform economy, where um, China through Alibaba and Ant Financial in particular has a large trade and payments export uh, strategy where it's exporting its trade and payments infrastructure along the Belt and Road, investing across the board. And I know it's a big theme in India as well, with Alibaba having invested in Paytm, etc. But it's creating these control positions globally towards a new form of globalization. And that to me is the next version of how countries can apply platform strategy. A third theme that and I'll just quickly summarize three or four themes without getting too detailed in the others. But a third theme is just about how um, after 10 years of disruption of telcos have been trying to respond in different ways, and Reliance comes in, takes 30 billion in debt, and fundamentally changes the economics because it commoditizes infrastructure, commoditizes bandwidth, and suddenly shifts the competition to a different playing scale. And so it kind of goes deep into understanding why the Reliance model worked and how you could apply it, how that could be a new playbook in the future. A couple of other themes. One that we're seeing come up is we'll start seeing platforms becoming more of cartels, where platforms have a way to share data, organize among themselves, and they'll be able to cartelize and coordinate more on how they govern the ecosystem, and who they let in and who they let out, rather than traditional cartels, which would govern on price, which would coordinate on price and quantity. And all these companies banning Trump and then banning apps like Parler, which is a microblogging network where there was a lot of right wing activity happening. All of this shows platform cartelization happening, and at the same time, we'll start seeing issues around regulation of platforms. We'll start seeing issues around uh, you know. Um, growing inequality, because those who work above the algorithm and build these products, a lot of people who are on this call at this point are going to benefit from it, whereas those who do the food delivery and do the ride hailing service, they're going to get increasingly commoditized. And so how do we manage that whole thing? So these are some of the issues that I'm talking about in that whole report.
Great. In your report, you were talking about Geo, right? So Geo kind of rewrote the incumbent playbook more or less, right? And the platform transformation that has happened via Geo. What are the lessons, like key lessons that incumbent businesses can learn from Geo's playbook? Like very very quickly, if you could summarize.
Yeah, sure. And Ujjwal, if it helps, I mean, I'm happy to extend this discussion a little bit and push out my next one.
Fantastic. Please,
Um,
please do. Yeah, yeah.
Now that we've kind of gotten into it, might as well,
Sure,
get
sure. Lovely.
the heart of
Thank
it.
you. Yeah.
So I think the key thing in terms of geo is essentially, uh, you know, the first key lesson that we see over there is I've talked to CEOs of telcos without don't want to name anyone, but I've talked to CEOs of telcos across the world,
Yeah.
and for the last several years, they've tried to answer the question, what would AT&T do? Right. So everybody wants to save their job. Nobody wants to be the next Apple, but they don't want to be told that AT&T did that and succeeded and you did not do that. So everybody wants to just compete within the economics of the industry, see, learn from quote unquote the leading loser in that industry rather than the winner coming in from another industry. And Geo kind of came in and obviously made a big bet with the $30 billion debt that they took. But typically, a fundamental industry disruption requires a big shift in technology. The smartphone came and became successful because 3G connectivity and cloud-based hosting of applications happened around the same time and happened around 2005 to 2007, and that is why the smartphone happened then. And similarly, Nokia happened because Java phones allowed embedding of applications and took power away from telcos. So there's always a shift that happens when a technological shift is happening. And so
Mhm.
I think one thing they did right was they sensed this shift, that 4G is going to be coming and we're going to just leave from 2G to 4G. In order to do that, we have to commoditize the infrastructure and then use that to commoditize bandwidth, and treat voice as data. And so the first point that I'm trying to make is, if you want to fundamentally change the economics of an industry, it does not happen all the time. You need a significant shift in underlying technology in order to do something like that. The second thing that we all kind of see uh, and which is very clear is that when you're kind of building out a strategy like this, you want to minimize your dependence on third parties and minimize your dependence, especially on other platforms. And I'll take just a couple of examples. Geo, it commoditized the infrastructure and the voice slash data level. But if you look at the phone, it did not build a phone on Android. It went after a totally, unknown Taiwanese operating system and built the Geo feature phone, 4G feature phone on that. And the reason for that is, while you're trying to dominate the economics, you don't want to be dependent on somebody else, because if the moment you succeed, you'll have somebody else turning on the bottleneck. And now they've gotten Google and are trying to move into an Android smartphone. So that's that's another key point, that you don't want to play in another platform's ecosystem while you're building your own. And the final thing that's important, which will determine how well they execute from here, is you need to know your limits. If you're fundamentally not a business that knows how to build the next WhatsApp, you want to create an investment vehicle for WhatsApp to come in. So a lot of traditional companies still don't fully understand this. They make big claims about, we want to be the next big tech, but some of those transformations are actually very difficult to manage. And one of the interesting ways to do that could be creating an investment vehicle like this. We still have to see how this plays out, because there are
Yes.
many other things beyond the economics that go into actual success over here.
And Sangeet, I think several decades ago, Theo Levitt at Howard said, "What business are we in?" Right, and that kind of that learning keeps coming back. It's such wise words, right? And in your report, I keep wondering, coming from a healthcare company, right? Healthcare is very complex industry
Right.
where advances happen over generation overall, right?
Yeah.
Now, you in your report, you're covering how big tech is making inroads into healthcare. What is your point of view, where you are at the vantage point, right? Where do you see big tech really making the largest impact versus the startups? That means companies that might not have as much capital and capability, and incumbents who might have a very different model right now. Would it be more personalized health services at an individual level, or at population level, or at the overall costs of the industry? Where do you see the biggest impacts coming with this big tech entering healthcare?
Yeah. So again, let me answer that question in two stages. Let's first talk about why is this a good time for big tech to come in, or for startups to come in general. And because I've done a lot of work in US healthcare, I'll give more of that perspective. But some of those things could be applied back to India and other contexts as well.
Absolutely.
So, one of the first things is that because of how electronic medical records were implemented in the US, none of it um, leveraged the fluidity of data. They basically mirrored the politics of medical systems rather than the power of technology. And so, Epic created Epic and Cerner, which are the two of the key electronic medical record companies. They started creating their own closed ecosystems. And one of the first things that allowed big tech to come in recently is that API level interoperability is now being allowed with what is called the FHIR resources, FHIR. And so with that, uh, Google had already purchased Apogee, Apple had purchased a company called Glimpse, and so they were just well set up to kind of move in this direction where they could, where they had companies which are already building for Fire. So that was one factor that helped them move in this direction. The second important change that is happening is that healthcare, even if you have electronic medical records, um, EMRs are a pain in the sense that they don't have good data entry. So they convert the doctor into a clerk, entering data and so on. And you would know this intimately from what you do as well. But a lot of the value is in the unstructured data, and that unstructured data is not in EMR. So advances in voice recognition, advances in text extraction, NLP, all of that has happened in the last decade, and has reached a point where given sophisticated healthcare related ontologies, you can now start extracting some of um, uh, that material, and that's where Google, Alexa, all of these players are building, uh, key capabilities to extract that from at the doctor's office, for instance. So extracting that unstructured data is another important thing that's beginning to happen now, and that gives a better record of the patient. And the third piece that's happening is just improvements in AI. And what improvements in AI do is they basically they change the economics, and they bring down the cost of making predictions. And once there's a very good book called Prediction Engines that goes into the economics of this. But once the cost of predictions comes down, the value of anything that is a complement to predictions, which is what the doctors actually do once they see the prediction, uh, all of that starts becoming important. But then in that process, you've commoditized prediction, and now you can put that prediction inside software. Now, this is where the big techs play a big role, because where the big techs have incredible power and soft and startups do not, to the same extent. um, and I will caveat this as well, because we have companies like Stripe that have kind of
Yes.
that model. But where the big techs have incredible power is cloud infrastructure is a scale business, and startups don't have scale. And because cloud infrastructure is a scale business, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, the big ones, they are well positioned to move into with commoditizing AI happening, with better data capture of unstructured data happening. Combine that with the fact that health systems are building on your cloud infrastructure. You have that perfect storm where you can come in and start taking up an increasing part of the value of the healthcare value chain. And there are issues over here in terms of Amazon. Healthcare companies don't trust Amazon because retailers have seen what Amazon can do, so they're happier with Microsoft. So those are the issues that kind of come in. But it's just a perfect time when these things are coming together. And again, just like the Reliance point that I was making, there's still healthcare being healthcare, there's still a lot of complexity that needs to be
Yes.
handled to make this work.
Absolutely. And I wish we had a lot more time, Sangeet. I wanted to discuss the impact of privacy and cartelization, for example, or the K-shaped return of the economy, as you've been talking about. But coming from this whole startup angle that you were
Yeah.
just referring to, one platforms have a winner take all impact overall. And the time that Facebook and others were rising, there was probably a few platforms here and there, but not at the scale that Facebook has achieved right now.
Yeah.
Or as you said about big, the technology infrastructure as an asset, right? Larger, you need to be having certain scale. Uh, what is your advice on startups? And we have, India is a major startup nation now. A big effort going on even from NASSCOM. should they be focusing on platforms because of the big tech entry, because of the requirement for longevity of capital and other forces essentially? What's your point of view?
Yeah. So, sorry, can you just mention the last part of it? Should they be focusing on?
So should they be focusing on building platforms because there is a gestation period even getting a
Yeah.
platform off the
Right.
ground? So what is your point of view there
Yeah,
essentially?
yeah. So I think there are a couple of things to think about over here. One is that there are um, one is that as so let me answer that from an entrepreneur's perspective and from a policymaker's perspective. From an entrepreneur's perspective, it's important to understand that platforms are not something you paint with one brush. There are many aspects that help you understand what makes a platform defensible versus not. A lot of things that are highly valued today, or have been, more importantly, highly valued over the last 3 to 4 years, and you know what kind of company I'm talking about, they did not have the defensibility that, or did not have the factors that make them a defensible platform. And so just one of those factors, for instance, is the reason something like Uber keeps on losing in a lot of markets is because the cost of switching from Uber to another business is or to a competitor is so low. The cost of just
Yes.
simultaneously multi-homing, so there is no defensibility in the so-called network effect. So understanding those issues, first of all, is key to you determining is um, uh, where is the dominant platform going to hang on for some time versus an industry where I can come in with a platform. And also just understanding what are the kinds of burn rates involved to get to a network effect. There are certain kinds of platform businesses where you don't have to worry about the network effect. You can say start with SaaS, get cash flow positive, and then start building a network around it and move to a platform business. So something like that is one model. But if you're starting from scratch, just getting a sense of what does it take to get to the network effect and become get to a point where it starts becoming valuable, what is the burn rate involved, just understanding that is important. The second piece that's important over here is that if you from a policymaker's perspective, if you want to think about should we build platforms or should we build something else, the bigger question to think about is what's the infrastructure we should be building, so that whether we build platforms on top of it, or whether we build applications, or whether we build services, businesses, whatever, we have unlocked so much value by standardizing the infrastructure that new innovation can keep happening. So irrespective of who wins or who loses, India wins in the end. So I think the most important aspect over here is really thinking about, I mean, the India stack is a good step in that direction, obviously, but it's really thinking about what are those fragmentation points of fragmentation, areas of fragmentation in the economy where we can really bring in that efficiency, whether it is in terms of standardizing how healthcare data is represented, whether it is in terms of standardizing supply chain data exchange, which is running on 20-25 years old technology, not built for today's age. All of those things from a maker's perspective, that's what I would look at, and then think about the kind of public-private effort that would make something like that happen. So that's how I would think about it.
Uh, Great conversation, Sangeet. I know we got delayed in starting this due to technical glitches. Last thought I wanted to share and understand from you is during this pandemic, lots of us have read a lot of books. What's on your reading list? And in the passing, would you also like to share a little bit about the new edition of your book that is coming out, right? And with your audience, what should they expect in that new edition?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a lot of the books that I have been reading over the last year or so have not been so much about tech. They have been they have been more about managing your mindset, if anything, because uh, uh, I believe that is I think COVID kind of pushed all of us in different ways, in different directions. And a big part of what I used to do was travel globally and speak and all of that. And so that kind of gets you have to rethink that when you are in a world where travel does not exist. So because of that, I kind of did a lot more of mental training over the last 1 year, if anything. Going back to the new book that's coming out, it's basically a new edition of my first book, Platform Scale, but it's updated for how you would think about building platforms in 2020 with some of the realities that come in. So something like a strategy that Stripe followed to penetrate different platforms and then from there get into identity management did not exist when I wrote the book back in 2015. So there's some new strategies, a lot of new strategies like that, but also kind of just laying out how uh, because of COVID, how platform opportunities expand, but also the new questions around who controls platforms, how are platforms governed, all those things start becoming important as well. And the final piece that's quite interesting in the whole book is just getting a sense of which industries are moving and how will platforms look like in those specific industries. So that's really the overview of what we have there.
Great speaking with you, Sangeet.